A judge publicly fined her for a small cross necklace, assuming that she was merely another face in the throng. However, the bailiff was left in awe by the events that transpired after she stood up and spoke, as the entire courtroom fell mute. Alana Meriwether did not anticipate any drama when she arrived at the Rutherford County Courthouse. She arrived to provide assistance to her younger cousin Deshawn, who had been detained following a minor traffic stop that had escalated into a much more significant incident than it should have. She took the day off from work, wore a navy blue blouse, trousers and flats. Nothing extravagant, simply something that is respectful. She wore a delicate gold chain with a diminutive cross around her neck. It was understated. It was scarcely discernible, unless one was actively seeking it. However, someone was. The courtroom was crowded, with a mixture of individuals waiting their turn, attorneys perusing files, and deputies standing silently by the walls. With her pocketbook folded in her lap, Alana slid into the second row, remaining silent and composed. She gently nodded to her cousin, who appeared fatigued from tension and had heavy eyes due to insufficient sleep. He did not utter a word, rather he simply extended a thank-you gaze to her. That was sufficient. Judge Raymond Keller entered with his regular rigid stride. The individual was well known in Murfreesboro and beyond. His attorneys murmured about his particularity: old school, uncompromising, and firm to the point of being icy. As a Vietnam veteran who transitioned to a legal career, he regarded the courtroom as a sacrosanct space. Is his? The bailiff summoned the audience to order. I would like to address a matter of decorum before we proceed, Judge Keller stated, surveying the rows with the intent of issuing a reprimand. Alana was the sole object of his gaze. You, madam, the azure one, kindly emerge. Alana, taken aback, blinked and then slowly started to stand. Although her pulse beat slightly more rapidly, she maintained her composure. He remarked, his voice trembling, you are donning a religious symbol. That is not permissible in my courtroom. Neutrality is crucial in this context. For violating court decorum, I am imposing a fine of $50. The room fell silent. A few individuals adjusted their seating. Others withdrew their gaze, feeling uneasy. Alana refrained from responding immediately. She was not unfamiliar with the experience of being publicly singled out, questioned and dismissed. However, she had not anticipated this outcome. Is there a penalty for donning a necklace? She gazed at the bailiff before returning to the judge. Your Honor, she said in a composed voice, is this a policy that has been published? I would appreciate the statute or judicial rule that authorizes that penalty. Keller maintained his composure. This is my courtroom. The regulations are established by me. Alana slowly nodded. I comprehend that, sir. However, are those regulations documented for future reference? He fixed his gaze on her for an extended period of time. You have the option to pay the fine at the clerk's desk or depart. A small gasp was audible from a person seated one row behind her. Alana refrained from moving. She refrained from raising her voice. She refrained from engaging in a debate. She simply inclined her head slightly and declared, I am not departing. A man in a tan suit, an elderly gentleman, raised his eyebrow in the front row. His curiosity was piqued as he glanced from her to the judge and back again. Keller adjusted his gown. Thereafter you will be treated with contempt. The bailiff shifted on his feet. The prosecutor placed his file on the ground. A change was occurring. The atmosphere was oppressive, not due to the drama, but rather due to the focus. Alana exhaled through her nostrils. I am present to exhibit my solidarity with my cousin Deshawn Grissom. He requested my presence today, as he is scheduled to be charged. I am not present to cause any disruption, Your Honor. However, I am of the opinion that this sanction is not only unjust, but it may also be illegal. Judge Keller leaned slightly forward. Are you questioning my authority? She did not flinch. I am seeking clarification regarding the legal basis of your policy. He hesitated. For a brief period, that pause was present, albeit subtly. He had not anticipated that outcome. He inquired, his voice becoming increasingly strained. Who are you? My name is Alana Meriwether, she responded. I am a constitutional attorney who is licensed in 3 states, including Tennessee. The courtroom ruptured. The collective inhalation was nearly palpable. A person muttered under their breath. Damn, she persisted, remaining composed and measured. In 2010, I completed my studies at Harvard Law School. I am presently the senior counsel at a non-profit organization in Memphis, and I have previously worked for the Southern Center for Human Rights. I am present as a family member, but I am aware of the law and my rights." Keller reclined. He appeared disturbed for the first time, not out of anger, but rather unsteady. He had the option of smiling. She refrained from doing so. The silence that ensued was oppressive. The judge opened his mouth, but he quickly closed it again, focusing on the stack of files on his desk. However, the judge was unaware of the identity of the individual with whom he was conversing. Alana did not grow up in a wealthy family. She was reared in a faded brick duplex located off of Robinson Road in Jackson, Mississippi. Denise, her mother, worked nocturnal shifts at a nursing home, and her father departed when she was 8 years old. They possessed few possessions, but they established regulations. Your speech is unambiguous. You do not diminish yourself. When something is not in order, you rise to your feet. However, you accomplish this with a composed demeanor and a high-pitched voice. Alana had read the Constitution 2 times by the age of 16, not for academic purposes, but rather to comprehend the reasons why individuals of her gender were treated differently in courtrooms, offices, and stores. Occasionally, even in worship, she was not motivated by wrath. Curiosity was the driving force. Additionally, there is an additional item: a peaceful fire, something more profound. She was consistently underestimated by others, not only in the obvious ways, not just because of her brown complexion or the fact that she wore her hair naturally, but also with the way they looked past her during meetings. The manner in which older male attorneys would address her as a young lady in a room filled with men who had fragile egos and thinning hair. She discovered at an early age that superior intelligence was never sufficient. At times you were required to transport it in solitude. You were required to allow them to believe that they were more intelligent until they unwittingly fell into your snare. It did not even feel like a celebration when Alana was accepted into Harvard Law, rather it was a confirmation. She had informed her high school counselor of her aspiration to become a civil rights attorney. The woman laughed, legitimately laughing, before informing her that law school was exceedingly competitive and not the most feasible option. Alana did not respond. She simply intensified her academic pursuits. She was not vocal at Harvard. She was unnecessary. She occupied the front row of each constitutional law class, scribbling notes rapidly and posing inquiries that caused her professors to blink. People began to take note, yet she continued to be treated as an exception. She was never satisfied with that. She declined 2 substantial employment opportunities following her graduation. She desired actual cases, real individuals. After a brief period of employment in Alabama, where she represented minors who were entangled in the system, she relocated to Memphis to become a member of a non-profit organization that was dedicated to combating housing discrimination. She did not appear on the covers of any magazines. There is no blue checkmark adjacent to her name. However, her efforts resulted in individuals being released from prison. It ensured that families remained in their residences. It altered the course of existence. Throughout it all, she donned that small gold cross. It was not for display. It was not for any other individual. It had been her grandmother's, and it had been handed down with a handwritten note that read, "Wear this when you need to be reminded you're not alone." She never removed it. Not a single time. Not even in court. Therefore, when Judge Keller singled her out in that manner, as if she were a disruptive adolescent in detention, it did not faze her. It served as a reminder of the numerous occasions on which she had been observed without being truly acknowledged. She was not anticipated by them. The boisterous one was anticipated. The individual who suffers from anger. The individual who is prepared to rage or storm out. It was not the same as what they received. Precision was the outcome. Control, power restrained. Additionally, it was not the initial instance. In 2017, she observed a public counsel in a courtroom in Little Rock as he stammered through a bail hearing. The adjudicator was not paying attention. The defendant, a 19-year-old individual who was accused of trespassing at an abandoned building, was on the brink of being required to post $1,500 in bond, which he was unable to afford. Alana rose from her seat, introduced herself, and cited 3 Arkansas statutes that the judge had evidently neglected. The magistrate relented. Bail was waived. The child exited the premises on the same day. That was her identity. So, while she was seated in Rutherford County, penalized for a necklace that held immense significance to her, in the presence of a judge who believed he could compel her to sit down and remain silent, Alana did not flinch. She maintained a more upright posture, and her purpose in informing the tribunal of her identity, including her name, credentials, and the reason for her attendance, was not to satisfy the judge. It was intended for all individuals who observed her and believed that she was merely the cousin of someone else. However, today was not one of those days when she could remain silent. The courtroom maintained an excessively tranquil atmosphere. Judge Keller shuffled a few documents, as if he were purchasing time. Alana, however, remained motionless. Her hands were clasped together in front of her. Anticipating. Not difficult. Awaiting. The prosecutor leaned slightly forward from the far corner, his fingertips no longer flicking through his folder. The bailiff's gaze alternated between Keller and Alana. It was palpable. There had been a change. The bench was no longer the primary source of authority in the room. Keller expunged his larynx. The following case will be heard by this court. He did not address the sanction once more. Not yet. However, the silence that replaced his reprimand was observed by all. Deshawn's case was called. He remained motionless in the rumpled button-down shirt that he had worn to the county jail. His eyes were a combination of pride and concern as he cast a gaze at Alana. She conveyed a solitary, composed expression to him. A gaze that conveyed the message, "Do not be alarmed. I possess this." While the public defender approached the table, Alana advanced before he could speak. "Your Honor," she stated emphatically, "I would like to represent Mr. Grissom today, provided that the court grants me permission. I have evaluated the charges and engaged in a conversation with him. He desires my assistance in advocating for him." Judge Keller's eyes averted. "You are not listed as counsel. I am in possession of my bar card. The license for Tennessee is current. I am listed under Alana Joy Meriwether. If you would like to confirm with the Board of Professional Responsibility." His hesitation was just a tad excessive. Then he simply nodded once. "Continue." Next to Deshawn, Alana placed her foot. Her cousin appeared to be experiencing a simultaneous desire to weep and giggle. She tenderly placed one hand on his shoulder. Mr. Grissom was stopped for a malfunctioning rear light as she turned to face the court. According to the arrest report, he was requested to depart the vehicle and subjected to a search without his consent. The officer's statement did not include any probable cause or warrant. Additionally, when he inquired as to why he was being handcuffed, the halt escalated into a form of resistance to arrest. He never elevated his voice. No one was ever threatened by him. She extracted a document from her purse. "I have submitted a written motion to dismiss, which is substantiated by 3 Tennessee Supreme Court rulings. Each individual confirms that a warrantless search in these circumstances is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Furthermore, the allegation of resisting arrest is not substantiated by video evidence, despite the fact that officers are required to wear department-issued body cameras." The room was once more silent. Keller frowned, leaned back, and accepted the motion from the attendant. Reading it was his activity. His mandible twitching, his eyes scanning rapidly. You could observe it. Alana refrained from uttering any further words. She maintained her position, allowing him to read the text but not enough to forget her. People began to shift behind her, not out of ennui, but out of attention. This was not the same woman they had believed was in distress just a few minutes prior. This individual was utterly different. Judge Keller raised his head. "Did you compose this motion independently?" "I did. I composed it last night after examining the police report and consulting with Mr. Grissom regarding the arrest." "And you are not affiliated with a firm?" "I am employed by a civil rights non-profit organization. We concentrate on wrongful convictions, housing discrimination, and violations of due process." The motion was lightly tapped on the desk by the magistrate. "What is the record of your client?" "There are no prior arrests or violent offenses. He is a full-time electrician's apprentice who was merely attempting to arrive at work on time on the day in question." Another extended period of silence. Keller finally gazed at the prosecutor. "What is your stance?" The prosecutor hesitated. "We are amenable to dismissing the resisting charge, but we will maintain the traffic infraction." Alana's voice was firm as she spoke once more. "We would agree to that condition provided that the court acknowledges that the search was unlawful. Mr. Grissom is entitled to that on the record. It was audacious. There is no need for an apology. There is no need for concern. A straightforward, reasonable request that is legally supported." Keller gazed at her. The courtroom was unfamiliar with the sight of a black woman dismantling protocol with the ease of a child. However, there is no animosity. Egoless. Just the truth. Accurate, proportioned information. He adjusted his spectacles. Motion approved. The act of resisting detention is dismissed. A traffic infraction is subject to a warning. There will be no penalties. Alana indicated her agreement with a slight inclination. Absence of a grin. Victory laps are prohibited. She addressed Deshawn. "You are at liberty to depart." At first he refrained from moving, as if his body required time to adjust to his psyche. Afterward, he emerged from the defendant's table and enveloped her in a close embrace. The courtroom was once again filled with whispers, this time regarding her rather than the case. Nevertheless, Alana's subsequent actions froze everyone in their tracks. Alana refrained from returning to her seat. Her voice remained unwavering as she turned toward the bench. "Your Honor, I would like to formally contest the fine that was imposed earlier this morning before I take my seat." Keller reclined, as if he had been abruptly roused from his slumber. "Do you wish to revisit that issue?" "Yes, sir," she replied. "You declared that religious symbols were prohibited in your courtroom. However, the First Amendment remains in force unless this tribunal is under martial law." She was not raising her voice. It was unnecessary for her to do so. In County of Allegheny v. ACLU, the Supreme Court underscored the necessity for government institutions to maintain a neutral stance toward religion, rather than a hostile one. Banning a small cross pendant, particularly from an individual who is not testifying or addressing the court at that moment, is not consistent with neutrality. It is suppression that is specifically directed. The gallery had come to a complete standstill. Alana advanced 1 foot. Additionally, there is no written policy that has been posted, no public signage that specifies the prohibition, and no prior notification has been issued. Without any attempt to verify my intent or role in the proceedings, you find me without citation or precedent. Keller adjusted in his seat. Some of the control that was characteristic of his visage had been lost. You could observe a movement behind his eyes, calculation, uncertainty, perhaps even humiliation. "Are you alleging that the court has violated your rights?" he inquired. Alana maintained her composure. "I am not making any accusations. I am providing factual information. I am also requesting that the fine be rescinded, and that the court record indicate that this incident occurred outside of the appropriate process." The prosecutor briefly glanced upward before returning to his seat. The bailiff's jaw was clenched, and his bearing was more formal than it had been before. His hands were now clasped in front of him. Keller did not respond immediately. For an extended period of time, he fixed his gaze on her. Afterward, he stated, "The fine has been rescinded. It will not be recorded." Alana responded with a straightforward affirmation. "Your Honor, I am grateful." She turned around and proceeded to her seat in a composed manner. Individuals resumed their muttering. However, this time, the perplexity was not muffled. Curiosity was the driving force. Showing respect, the individual in the pew in front of her uttered the question, "Who is she?" Alana refrained from participating. She simply sat, retrieved her notebook, and discreetly opened it to a blank page. For the first time in the morning, the judge appeared to be truly contemplating the situation. He advanced at a sluggish pace. He conducted a more thorough examination of the files. The conflagration that he had ignited by fining her for a necklace had evolved into something else, a heftier object. The prosecutor murmured something as he leaned toward the bailiff. The bailiff nodded once and jotted down a note on a pad. The alteration was observed by individuals. The court resumed its proceedings. Additional cases were contacted, however, the rhythm was disrupted. The allegations were no longer the focus of the individuals who were watching. Their gaze perpetually returned to her. Alana Meriwether, the woman who corrected a judge without increasing her voice. 30 minutes have elapsed. Subsequently, Judge Keller abruptly requested a brief intermission. He rose and withdrew through the side door without uttering a word. Alana remained seated. The bailiff approached her at a leisurely pace. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gradually becoming more subdued. "May I inquire about something?" She inclined her head slightly. "Certainly. Were you aware that that was going to occur? Regarding the penalty?" In light of all of this, Alana exhaled a gentle chuckle through her nose. "I was unaware. However, I refused to overlook the situation." The bailiff massaged the back of his neck. "I have been residing here for 8 years. I have never witnessed him retreat in such a manner." She spoke softly. "He is not a malevolent individual. However, the absence of accountability is perilous." He nodded, not out of obligation, but out of comprehension. 2 court reporters conversed in a subdued voice down the hall. It was evident that the younger individual was agitated. She was well versed in each case. Just shook them off. "Attorney? Indeed, from Harvard University. Is that a reality?" She arrives to lend her support to her cousin, but she ultimately instructs the judge. They shook their minds. Nevertheless, Alana was not brimming with pride. Dismantling an individual did not provide any sense of fulfillment. Keller was not intended to be embarrassed by her presence. She merely desired equity. Additionally, when it failed to materialize, she constructed it independently, one word at a time. However, Judge Keller's irises began to reflect a more profound emotion. When Judge Keller returned to the courtroom, he appeared to have undergone a transformation. His shoulders were not as square. He did not appear to be diminutive. Rather, he appeared to be more subdued, less like a man who is attempting to maintain control, and more like an individual who is attempting to comprehend how he lost control without realizing it. He sat down, adjusted his spectacles, and contacted the subsequent case. However, his tone had also diminished. To the average person, it was scarcely discernible. However, Alana did not have the same experience. She had previously observed this phenomenon. Males in positions of authority, struggling to confront an unpleasant reality, that they had violated a boundary, and an individual they did not anticipate responded by opposing them. Keller did not immediately depart the bench after the court adjourned. As individuals filed toward the exit, he remained seated, gazing directly ahead. Alana was on her way to the door when she heard him call her name, after she had collected her purse. "Miss Meriwether." Her expression was unintelligible as she halted and spun. He was now standing, and leisurely descending the stairs, as if each one caused him to pause. "If you are amenable, I would appreciate the opportunity to speak." The bailiff was uncertain as to whether this was a personal request or an order, and he shifted uncomfortably. Alana gave a modest nod before turning her attention to Deshawn. "Give me 5, she murmured to him. Keller did not accompany her to the chambers. They were positioned just to the side of the vacant courtroom, far enough to maintain a degree of privacy, while still being visible. He exhaled. "I am responsible for offering you an apology." Alana declined to respond. "Not yet." She permitted him to locate his words. "I made an assumption," he continued. "An unjust one. About your intentions. Regarding your position. I was mistaken." She replied quietly, but without bitterness. "I am accustomed to it." He gazed downward. "That is the issue, is it not? It is unnecessary for you to be so." Once more, silence. Keller stated, "I have been seated behind that bench for 32 years, and I have always taken pride in my ability to maintain order, structure, and neutrality. However, you have caused me to recognize that what we refer to as neutral is often simply convenient for the individuals who are already in charge." That was heavier than he had anticipated. Alana gazed at him with composure and respect. Absence of ego. Her silence was merely the truth. He stated, "I do not anticipate forgiveness. However, I will not forget today." Alana indicated her agreement with a slight inclination. "That is the extent of my expectations." She turned to depart, but he called after her one final time. "I would be delighted to listen to you argue once more, if you ever return to Murfreesboro." Officially, she was taken aback by that aspect. "I hope that I will not be required to," she stated with a half smile. They were both aware of the significance of that. The sun had risen to a higher altitude, and the heat was still clinging to everything. Deshawn was perusing his smartphone while standing by the footpath. The moment he encountered her, he was filled with joy. He expressed his astonishment by asking, "What the hell was that?" Alana's keys were extracted from her purse as she shrugged. A brief lesson in civics. You are not joking. You have effectively silenced a judge. Within his residence, she directed her gaze toward him. Refrain from romanticizing it. I did not arrive at that location with the intention of engaging in combat. I arrived to observe. However, when an individual attempts to diminish you for a characteristic that defines you, you are presented with two options: remain silent or speak up. Deshawn slowly nodded as she leaned against her vehicle. I swear if I did not know you better, I would have said that you rehearsed that. She laughed. I didn't, she replied. However, it may be beneficial to begin documenting it. At that moment, a local reporter from the Murfreesboro News Journal approached, carrying a notebook and a voice recorder. Miss Meriwether. Alana swiveled. I observed the events that transpired in that location. I believe that our readers would appreciate hearing your perspective. Would you be amenable to an interview? She briefly observed Deshawn before returning her attention to the reporter. Permit me to contemplate the matter. The reporter presented her with a card and then retreated. You elicited a lot of thought from a lot of people today. That is not a frequent occurrence in court. Deshawn stated. They're going to discuss this, you know, as they proceeded to the vehicle. Alana once more shook her head. Allow them to do so. However, the events that transpired outside of the courtroom were equally significant. Alana and Deshawn had arrived at his apartment complex on the western side of Murfreesboro to a continuous barrage of notifications on his phone, including texts, calls, and direct messages. A relation in Chattanooga had already been informed. An acquaintance from high school forwarded a screenshot of a local news blog with the headline, "Attorney silently dismantles courtroom bias. Judge withdraws fine. Dismisses case." Deshawn gazed at her with wide-eyed wonder. It is currently accessible online. Faintly, Alana smiled. I informed you that individuals converse, particularly when you fail to deliver the performance they anticipate. She did not desire attention. No, not at this time. Never. However, visibility was not always an option. It was a consequence of acting in accordance with the law when you were unable to remain undetected. Later that evening, she sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea, with the small cross necklace still resting on her clavicle. Some of the communications in her inbox were from individuals she knew, while others were from complete strangers. A few legal blogs had already published summaries. A Twitter user had excerpted a portion of the live stream footage and accompanied it with a caption that read, "This is how you correct injustice, without ever raising your voice." However, Alana was not perusing any of it. She was contemplating a statement made by Judge Keller. What we refer to as neutral is merely a matter of comfort for the individuals who are currently in charge of the gavel. That had become entrenched. She recalled clutching her grandmother's hand during the evening church service when she was a child. The pastor had stated, on occasion, the most audible action is to refrain from shouting. It is a lectern. It appeared to be profound at the time. However, the situation now appeared to be very genuine. She resumed her duties at the non-profit office in Memphis the following day. No one there treated her differently. One of the assistants presented her with a file and inquired whether she would be able to review a housing complaint by noon. There were no welcome back balloons or grand applause. She preferred it that way. However, news continues to circulate, regardless of whether one is responsible for its dissemination. She received a call from the Middle Tennessee State University Law Department 1 week later. They were preparing a community forum on bias and courtroom ethics, and a member of their board had proposed that she be invited to participate. She nearly declined. Nearly. She then recalled the courtroom and the manner in which people's perspectives changed when they recognized her as more than just a cousin. Additionally, how many individuals are still anticipating the opportunity to communicate when they were unable to do so? She consented to participate in the forum. A pastor from a church in the adjacent city of Smyrna contacted me 2 weeks later. He inquired as to whether she would be willing to address their youth regarding the law, including its true significance, its protective functions, and its equitable application when individuals are aware of how to hold it accountable. She responded in the affirmative. She continued to respond in the affirmative. Not because she enjoyed the attention. However, the narrative was no longer hers. It belonged to all individuals who had ever sat in the rear of a courtroom and thought, "They won't listen to me." Keller was never informed of this. However, that day also had an impact on her. She frequently considered him, and wondered whether he retained that moment in his consciousness in the same way she did. If he ever viewed an individual in his courtroom differently afterward, possibly with a greater degree of humility and concern. She expressed optimism. She observed an envelope affixed to her door as she was departing the office on a Friday afternoon. "Miss Meriwether, I have updated the courtroom conduct guidelines. The note contains her name, but there is no return address or name. Religious attire or symbols will no longer be penalized, provided that they are not disruptive. RK." There was no additional information, no contrition, and no signature beyond the initials. However, it was sufficient. She folded the note and placed it in her grandmother's Bible. However, Alana was never interested in receiving acclaim. She simply desired equity. Some narratives garner attention and dissipate within days, while others resonate deeply within individuals and alter their perspective on the world, even if they never encounter the individual who initiated the transformation. Alana Meriwether did not perceive that courtroom moment as a culmination. It was simply another chapter in a more extensive narrative, one that was replete with decisions that the majority of individuals never witnessed. For example, she would stay up all night to assist a tenant in defending against an illegal eviction, or she would receive late-night calls from frantic mothers whose sons were being held without bail. She would also drive 3 hours to a courthouse in Jackson to observe a judge who she had heard was mistreating low-income defendants from the back. She did not introduce herself. She observed, recorded her observations, and awaited the emergence of patterns. When inquired as to how she maintained her composure and refrained from reacting violently to disrespectful behavior, she consistently responded with the same phrase, "I am aware of the burdens I bear. I do not need to toss it around to demonstrate its weight." She was not altered by that tribunal. It simply served as a reminder of the reason she initially pursued this occupation, not for honor or revenge, but for dignity. She was not interested in humiliating Judge Keller, rather she aimed to provoke him to contemplate, and she succeeded in doing so. Months later, while addressing a group of adolescent girls at a public charter school in Memphis, one of them raised her hand and inquired, "Were you not the woman who interrupted the judge and made him appear foolish?" Alana grinned. I refrained from responding. I proceeded to speak. Additionally, I did not present him in a ridiculous manner. I afforded him the opportunity to reconsider an issue. The girl blinks. "Isn't that the same thing? Not even in the same league." A few of them chuckled, but 1 or 2 of them genuinely engaged in the conversation. Those were the individuals with whom she was conversing. She continued, "The objective is not to win arguments. It is to gain ground, thereby preventing the subsequent individual from engaging in the same conflict." That remained with them, as it did with her. She was aware that her narrative might be overlooked in news feeds. Eventually, the tweets, blogs, and snipped videos would all be buried. However, someone would remember. That was sufficient. A person in the gallery who observed the event unfold, an individual who had experienced feelings of invisibility that day, and emerged with a slight sense of confidence. People enter locations and demand to be seen. Then there are individuals such as Alana, who enter the room, speak with clarity, and depart with a changed atmosphere. She continued to wear the gold cross on a daily basis. In the event that another courtroom attempted to create an issue, she would be prepared to respond once more. Because there will always be someone who tries to reduce you to suit their comfort, and there will always be a choice. Stand or shrink, speak or allow the silence to speak for you. She opted to stand, not with noise but with knowledge, not with ego but with purpose. Additionally, this was the factor that elicited recollection. Not that she emerged victorious, but rather the manner in which she achieved it. If this narrative has evoked any emotion, thought, or contemplation in you, please do not keep it to yourself. Share, subscribe, and propagate it. You never know when your composed demeanor may be the catalyst for a transformation in the room.